Calling to order the Finance, Building, and Grounds Committee meeting, March 6, 2023. First thing on the agenda is the approval of the meeting minutes from February 6, 2023. Have a motion?
I'll motion. I'll motion. Second.
Meeting minutes are approved. Okay, second on the agenda, and just to make a general announcement before we get started, I will allow for public comment, but after we get through all of our presentations today. So we have 3 separate presentations. We've got a budget presentation for pupil services, a curriculum instruction budget by Dr. Soder, and then finally the technology services budget by Mr. San Francisco. So we'll first start out with the proposed pupil services budget by Mr. Bentman.
Okay, good evening, everybody. I am up first with the pupil services budget for the next year, 23-24. We can go to the next slide. So being up first is special because I have one of the larger budgets here for the district. We have a plethora of different areas and support student services that the department covers. The big ones, Chapter 15, Chapter 14, and Chapter 16. We also support students in our English language development program. Those students are multilinguistic or multilingual students, and they're supported by our ESL students, English as a second language teachers. So I want to make sure that whenever an acronym comes on or I'm discussing it, I want to make sure that I kind of spell it out for everybody, so I'm super clear and make sure that I catch that information. We also support our students that are involved in homeschooling at home, which they're eligible for some supports and services throughout the school day as well, even though they're not in the buildings. Our instructional support teams, or IST teachers and their teams that they work with. We have those at the elementary buildings, and then we have MTSS supports at the middle and high school, one of our big goals this year. Our psychologists, we have psychologist services that are part of our programming and part of our evaluation process. We have school psychologists that are contracted through the CCIU, and then we have school psychologists that are part of our own district personnel. All equally just as great. We have our school-based access programs, which are funded through Access, which, although I have a very large budget, my budget actually raises funds in some way, if you want to say that. So we actually bring in money to help support our services. This year, you'll see that it's around $1.2 million that we're going to be supporting services through Access. Our speech and language support, wonderful speech therapists throughout the buildings that help and support our students that have speech and language IEPs. Attendance is also part of the pupil services department, working with our attendance secretaries, our clerks, to support our students and making sure that our child accounting piece is squared away. And obviously the other piece is working with students to make sure they're involved in attending school. Students that are experiencing homelessness throughout the year, and that's a very fluid process. Our school health services, so all of our nurses throughout our buildings. We're fortunate to have a fantastic nursing staff here at ONJ. And then our school counselors, which we have quite a few in the buildings at the high school. We'll have 3 of them actually present at the March 13th work session. So I'm looking forward to the 3 joining us then. So as you can see, there's a lot of different areas. I want to point out that my budget, or the department's budget, is very fluid, right? Obviously, personnel is personnel, and it's here and it's set, but there's a lot of other stuff that goes into supporting students. And if we're going to be inclusive and we're going to make sure that we take care of kids, and our goal is what's best for kids, then my budget needs to have that fluidity throughout it to make sure we're taking care of them. All right, go ahead to the next slide, please. All right, so let's start off with the nitty-gritty here and talk about some of the key points here. So I think what maybe I'll do is I'll go through each slide and then ask if there's any follow-up questions through each slide. And if that's all right, Mr. Carmine? Is that good for you with the budget board? Okay. So first up, we have our English language learners. We have first charter schools, and charter schools are the charter schools. We're at a decrease of about $60,000 through that, which I'm not surprised. Coming out of COVID, we had an increase, and we've talked about our students that are attending charter schools in past board meetings and some numbers and things like that. So the goal is to get that down to as little as possible, because we feel we have a wonderful programming here at ONJ, and we feel that students would benefit from it. I get it. It might not be for everybody, but as we move forward, the department is one of the things in the mind of the department is to start to take a look at that and see how we can bring even more students back to experience our wonderful teaching and learning opportunities. Our multilingual learners, right, our ML students, we actually have about 70 at this point. It's increasing. And so there's also different tiers there. So although it says 60, we have different tiers with that we support through the financial aspect, right? So we have translator costs, we have travel between buildings for our two teachers, parent events, professional development, resource and materials. You can see up next, we have our life skills support. So there's a decrease there. Keep in mind that decrease could be one student, maybe not having services or in a certain way. So there's that fluidity piece there. That includes programs, transportation, maybe food, resources, such things. Our emotional support and autistic support and learning support classrooms, we have placements, we have supports at OJRSD. Related services for students that might need those services that have been identified as in those areas. We are seeing a decrease. We have a lower number of students that are in learning support take advantage of Vote Tech. So that's why we're seeing a little bit of a decrease there. Our multi-disability support, supporting students outside of our school buildings. Obviously, we always want students to come into our buildings and be a part of that inclusive model, but at the same time, we do have students that need more acute support. And those students, some of those students are in different placements. Intermediate unit, support through the IU, classrooms at the IU, so we're seeing a little bit of decrease, and that's through the CDC. Other special education programs, so that is a increase, and those are paras for students in outside placements that do not fall under some of our supports and services. So those are paraprofessionals in outsides, because we do fund those through the budget. Our transition program, our 18 to 20-year-olds, seeing a little bit of an increase there. Homebound instruction, once again, that can go up and down depending on the health of our students. For example, a student that might be had surgery and they're not able to attend school, we provide some hours throughout the week for homebound instruction, where our wonderful teachers might provide that inside the home for students that are not ready to come back based off of different health reasons. These numbers, just a quick informational point, these numbers are all about 3-year averages if we can't get like more of an exact amount. So we look for some of them at a 3-year average. Some we're very able to calculate down to like pretty close, but we are working with a 3-year average with some of these numbers. All right, so questions on this slide?
Brad, a question I had was on the multidisciplinary disability support. Does that account for all the students that are in approved private schools?
Yeah.
Could not be serviced.
Correct. Correct. So these students are not in our buildings, but we support them in outside placements. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, just 2 questions. One sort of relating to that. You said that the students who were in other special ed programs, that was a big, that large number there, other special education programs. You're saying that was for paras? that are with students who are placed out of our buildings? Is that what you were saying?
Correct, yeah.
So like, you mean like when we have to send someone to a special school because we don't have enough services for them or whatever? And so we're spending 700 and some $1,000 on paraprofessionals for those students? Is that what I'm seeing this? Or are there other costs that you're talking about?
I just want to make sure you.
I'm looking at,
You're looking at other special education
other,
programs.
yeah, that says 732,136. That's all
Is that the right
paraprofessional?
line?
Other special education programs.
That, yes,
That seems like a lot
It's the
for how many paraprofessionals is that?
$732,000
yes.
item. And there are,
I'm sorry, I can't hear you, Jackie. Say it
I'm
again.
sorry, there are other services in there as well. Like, that's where like the BCBA's and some of the other.
Any other type of
Any other
support.
support
That
students.
para could be one piece of, pairing paras could be one piece of that. But you could have some students that might need, like, we're talking about students that get intense support, so we could have a lot of adults supporting students, not one student in particular,
Right, sure,
but
yeah.
multiple students. We have nursing care as well, so if a student needs nursing, and it's in a program, that could be a piece of that as well.
Okay, sorry to be indelicate about this, but I just don't fully understand. So if we're sending a student and, we approve contracts, what are they called? Release forms for students, and you could be paying, somewhere like $40,000 or something for a student to attend some other school because we
Correct.
cannot meet their needs. So we're paying for a paraprofessional on top of that? Or is that included in that?
Yeah, at times, we pay for, if a student needs more support, they'll bill us for that para. They have to pay that para. So
Okay.
if it's not embedded in the tuition cost for the student, we then have to pay for that para support.
Okay, so it would be in addition to whatever we voted on here. Okay.
And Ms. DiMarino, we can put together a summary of what makes up this number so that you can.
That'd
see
be
the
great.
details.
Thanks. I'd love that. Okay. And then the other question I had was just regarding the charter schools. So you're proposing that some students will return. How do you gauge that at this point of the school year? Like what's going to happen for next year's, enrollment with charter schools and things like that? Are we in contact with families, and how's that number?
That number is based off of where we are right now. So we take that number and we just base it off. We'll take a look at kindergarten and see how many kindergarten students are in charter schools, and we'll kind of do a 3-year average and then kind of roll that in, or we'll go off the 12th grade piece there. So we just move everything up and then we just go off 3-year average for kindergarten.
Okay. And is there any additional time, in the latter half of this year that parents will be contacted in order to try to see if students are, interested in coming back from a charter school? Will we be pursuing any families in the
So
meantime?
that's always that was one of my goals coming into this position. It's just something that I haven't been able to get to at this point. But I think, right, so I have experience with this in my former district of trying to recruit, trying to bring back some of our students that we feel would benefit from our supports and services. We could call and ask, and we can do all that. But I think having a kind of a good vision and a good plan for that, and you want to provide that customer service to reach out and say, hey, what can we provide? So I think it's more of like a multi-step process. But yeah, it's always been it was a goal of mine to call parents and try to bring them back. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks.
One more question on the charter schools. Of that 170, do you have a breakdown of how many are in brick and mortar versus cyber?
Yeah, I don't have that in front of me, but we can get that for you. We can can get that for you.
Because I would think post-COVID, you probably have a better chance of attracting back the cyber.
Right, when you think about what our numbers were last year, we were at like 190. And so here we are at 170, so you're seeing a decrease with the tuition increase. And then if you're looking at regular brick and mortar cyber, we're at about 1.2, 1.3 million. And then, I'm sorry, regular brick and mortar charter, you're about 1.3 million of that. 2 million is related to cyber charter. There's still significant cyber charter.
Interesting.
Could I have make a suggestion for the future? I like that you put down, 170 students for this year's budget, but could you maybe put down the number of students from last year to give it more context?
Sure.
And the charter school money, is that just like our cost per child
Yes.
transferring?
No, it's the tuition costs that we pay
Yeah.
for them to attend those schools. So, for example, for this year, we pay $13,738 for a regular education student, and for a special education student, it's $33,120. So it's kind of a mix of both. You have regular ed.
So charter schools, the first line is both those populations?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
Because, I'm just checking it. Last year was, overall it was like 17,000 per student, and now it's like over 19,000. So do we have more special ed, or?
Well, they identify that we are forced to pay their identification.
Right, we are seeing a rise in the identification. They may not leave Owen J. Roberts as a special education student, but then once they get there, it's how they identify them, that we pay tuition.
And that's a fixed cost. We have no control over these costs, right?
Right, it's the law, basically.
So I think my question with, going back to that other chart, previous slide. So, which of these costs here, obviously you're projecting students, and that kind of thing. And then, like charter schools is a fixed cost. We have no control over that. What costs do we have some control over? Like what contracts are up for renewal? What contracts are fixed for a term that we're locked into? Which of these costs are things that we can control?
They are really student-based costs, so we take, they do a very detailed, Brad and his team do a very detailed budget estimate, so they're taking each child that is in the program, that's why you can see the numbers, and building out the costs and projecting. So the types of things that we have contracted services for are things like PTS, mental health clinicians, and I'm happy that they're not all renewing right now, because when contracts are renewing, they're going up across the board.
I think we're in the,
What are the terms of some of these contracts? Are they one-year terms or multiple year?
It depends on the contract. Some are multiple year, some are 1 year.
And
And
is
some are
there,
through the IU too, like some
Yeah.
of the services are provided.
and
through the community.
are some of the services competitive? Like, are there, multiple vendors for some of these services that we're looking at?
they are. There's competitive. PTS we're using. We left All Stills, which was way higher, providing much of a higher rate than PTS. We're also, I think, benefiting here. Some of our vendors have not increased prices on us, so I think we're, to be honest with you, probably on the opposite end of being fortunate not to have an increase with some of our major vendors that are providing supports. We have very small, we have very big ones, depending on what they're supporting and who they're covering. But PTS being one of our bigger vendors, yeah. They really do try to work with us and provide the best rate. And we have done some shopping in the past, not recently, not this year, but we have. Now the thing is personnel, right? So here's the other piece. Got to keep this in mind, that people are hard to find, right? Things are drying up. So we have people in our buildings that are doing a great job that would be scooped up in a heartbeat in other areas. So we want to be careful of that piece too. Because if we go to another vendor that can promise us the world but don't deliver, that's going to be a problem. Yeah. Any other questions on this slide?
John asked about the charter schools. So the numbers in the parentheses, and I'm just for any of these for the students, this is the projected for next year, or is this what we currently have in the parentheses?
So the parentheses is the differential. So for example,
Yes, the number of students, sorry.
number of students, number of students would be the number of students we would moving into next year. So that's those are next year numbers.
Could we break that, could we also, could we put what we currently have versus what we're moving towards? Because it's really hard to, I think, to look at these numbers, and there's some dramatic differences. And I think if we could see
How many more students?
student,
we're
if
talking
there's
about.
more students or there's less students, the numbers would make a lot more sense. So some, I mean, learning support decreasing by 160,000, that seems like a really big drop. But if there's a big drop in students, that makes sense then.
Correct. And we also got to keep in mind that we have 12th graders moving out, right? So that could be, and then kindergarten coming in, and we're off kindergarten, we're still we have our EI numbers, but we really don't have a clear sense of what they are. And we could also have larger cohorts needing more intense support at the 12th grade level, and even the post-12th grade level moving out and coming in. We do have, right, so, and I will tell you, without getting too into the weeds here, that we do have a little bit of a handful of students that are transitioning, aging out, 21. Remember that Act 55 allowed students to come another year. That was a large amount of money, very large. So keep that in mind, that could have an effect on things. Yeah, and these are actually, my apologies, these are actually current numbers now. Those are these are this year's numbers. So I want to correct myself there. But we're going to get you comparison. We'll get you comparison to last year's budget compared to this year's, and I think two of you have asked that, so we'll definitely clear that up and get that for you. Okay, so next group here, we haven't had, we have a decrease of 55,000 for adjudicated youth, right? Court adjudicated youth, because we really don't have, haven't come across much recently. So we've had zero costs in the past few years. So that's why we're at zero. We look at like a 3-year average. So we don't have any students that we're paying for through adjudicated youth programs. Pupil services operations are admin costs and software like Decision Insight. So the enrollment projections, Raptor for attendance or for other areas. We use a different program now, but Power Schools, but those sort of programs that we use. This is admin costs. So a little bit of an increase there. Shouldn't say a little bit of an increase.
Mr. Bettman, we have one question from
Oh, yeah,
a board
sorry
member
about
that's
that.
online.
Yep.
Just want to.
Okay.
Warren.
Yes, good evening. Sorry, I couldn't be there. Is there a later slide that contains a line item for contingency dollars related to the previous slide? You said that number is fluctuating, but since you can't predict what students will come into the district next year, is there a line item for dollars that are held in reserve to cover that?
Are you asking regarding the charter school?
Just that whole previous slide.
Oh, okay, the whole previous slide. Not necessarily within this budget. We do build contingency into the overall budget. So pupil services doesn't have a contingency line item, but the general fund does have an operating contingency line item that is in line with school board policy. So we have 1% of the budget that we always have in a contingency line item for anything.
Okay, thank you.
Good question.
So for guidance services, we have 2 social workers that we have. So you'll see a big increase in this area for guidance services. So the reason why we have a big increase is because here is here's the piece that we were paying for through the pupil services budget, not ESSER's funds. So as you recall, we got mental health grants and we had ESSER's funds that supported some of the personnel that we have contracted out, and that money is going away for next year. So the proposal is to pick up that through the pupil services budget. So for example, 2 social workers through that budget. So we have one at the high school/middle school, and then we have one at the elementary level that we contract out. We have our mental health scholastic coaches. We have 1 in 4 actually at the elementary level. Still looking for the 5th one to hire. And then we have support at the high school as well for mental health scholastic coach. And then we have our SAP intervention specialist as well at the high school level. So those are sort of the things that are in the guidance services that we're picking up through the grants that are no longer available. Psychological services, We're actually going to be reorganizing this just a tad. We moved up one of our contracted school psychologists into Access. We were able to do that. I'll get to the Access slide, but we really can only use Access money for special education services that affect students with IEPs. So we moved one of our school psychologists that's contracted up to Access. So that's why you're seeing a decrease there, but then you'll see an increase in Access when I get down to that. Professional development, this is down specifically because it's not a CPR first aid year. So that's why we're at a decrease. We're in a cycle for CPR and first aid, so we're not in a CPR first aid year. Student agreements, settlements, so this is an increase. This is one of the fluctuation pieces where we have different student agreements throughout the year. And that would be, that it's an increase for our settlements. And it all depends on what occurs each year and what students need. OT-PT, more students receiving services for OT-PT, so occupational therapy and physical therapy. So we see an increase there. For our ATP, this is, we support some students through a multivariable calculus class. So this is when they take all the math at the high school level. So we're going to have less students doing the multivariable calculus class. We'll have like very few, maybe one at the most, to do that. So that's why you'll see a decrease. We pay Johns Hopkins University for the students very few students to take that. CCIU operations, this is a flat 25% cost of maintenance and operations at the CDC building. So this number comes right from the IU. Each district is charged based off of the district's market value per PDE-8 ratio. So we pay what they ask us to pay in that area. And then ESY, we looked at who's actually attending, right, for ESY. We have some students that don't attend, we have some that do. So that's the middle school, the high school, and the elementary school ESY program and what it costs to fund ESY.
So Brad, where is the staffing for the gifted program? Under whose budget would that be?
That is not in pupil services budget, so that would be in the personnel budget, the overall personnel budget.
What about Brandywine Virtual Academy? Where does the cost for that land in budgets? Because I thought that might be under the CCIU, but it's not.
No, we actually have a separate line item for that, which we have in the overall projected budget, so we can talk about that. We're planning on the 13th during the working session to do another overview of the
Okay,
overall budget.
because
So
obviously that might be relevant with the whole charter school, even though it's not a charter school, but like cyber and all that,
Right.
just, okay.
Yep.
So in that presentation on the 13th, when we see personnel, we would be able to see who's assigned as a gifted ed teacher, for instance, just to get a sense of what that program costs.
We don't usually go down to that level, like the person assigned, but I can provide you with any information that you want.
I'm just curious as to how
Yeah.
it's done,
Yeah,
how it's delivered.
right. And so we have, obviously, we have to code teachers in a certain way with respect to what they're doing. So I can provide you with a report, special ed, by building,
Just
however you want to
curious,
see it.
yeah.
Anybody online?
That's good.
So moving on to the next slide, we have transition services at the high school. So we have a transition coordinator. We have a salary built into that through a contracted service. There is a slight decrease. We have other things in there as well. It's not just a person, but there's the numbers there. We have our individualized education plan or IEP facilitators. We have 3 throughout the district. We have an IEP facilitator that supports, at this moment, supports North Coventry, supports East Vincent and the middle school. We have an IEP facilitator that supports the other elementary buildings, French Creek, West Vincent, and East Coventry. And then we have one that supports the high school. So those are the 3 facilitators. We have our IEP scheduler. That's a 0.5 secretary, and you can see the number coming in there. 0.5 of 2 of our special education supervisors are in the special education supervisor numbers. So we have 2 special education three special education supervisors. We have one at the middle school, basically the same as the IP facilitator, one at the middle school, one at North and one at East, and then we have the three other elementary buildings, and then we have the high school. So those are there. We are shifting that next year just to, it's a good time to talk about it, so I'll just quickly talk about it. We are shifting our supervisor, how we manage the grade levels. So we'll have one special ed supervisor for K to 4, actually pre-K to 4, i.e. into 4th grade. We'll have one 5, 6, 7, and we'll have one at the high school. What's nice about how we have it set up is with that shift, the IEP facilitators will then pair up with the supervisors as well. So they'll shift into those grade levels as well. We're looking forward to it because it's going to be a nice way to beef up our transitions from elementary to middle school, consistency in the 5 elementary buildings. So we are, it's a nice shift that will help and support our buildings. Those teams do, in my opinion, do a great job. Those teams of 2 supporting not only the teachers, the building, but also getting down to the nitty gritty and helping and support IEPs and things like that, implementation at different times. We have our emotional support. So it could be instruction in the home for a student and 0.5 board certified behavioral analyst. We call them BCBAs, board certified behavioral analyst. So we have a little bit of an increase in that with the emotional support costs. Chester County Intermediate Unit placements, we're no longer paying for student placements out of IDEA funding, so we are now paying through other budgets, mainly pupil services. For those, and that's the Chester County. That's why it's all negative, and it's yellow and red. Software supplies, so we have TiNet is one of them. TiNet is how we manage our IEPs and our evaluations and some other paperwork. Vizzle, which is a program the teachers use to create lesson plans that help and support students more visually. For some of our students who need visual accommodations or auditory accommodations, teachers can also share lesson plans. It's interactive. And the CEIS services are BCBA, our Certified Behavioral Analysis. And we have 2 registered behavioral technicians. So we call them RBTs, Registered Behavioral Technicians. We have 2 of those at the elementary level. We brought those on last year, and this is the second year we've had those supports. And in a time where it's hard to find personnel, they've been a really good support to our elementary buildings. And then so that's those titles there. The IDEA funds these are federal funds that we're able to use.
Question on that. The IEP facilitators, the 3 of those, what are those certified teachers, or what are their credentials, those people?
Special education. All 3 of them were special education teachers. All 3 of them, I believe, were special education teachers in the district prior to becoming an IEP facilitator. Typically, that position is looked at as it's a leadership position among staff. They help and support. They are REA members, so they're part of the teacher's contract and part of the union. But they support teachers more than students, so they're more of a teacher support.
Do they have contact with students? Are they in the classroom with kids?
They are. They're in the classroom with kids, not all the time, but at times they're in classrooms with kids. Sometimes they help and support progress monitoring. Sometimes they read many of the IEPs to make sure that things are in check and things are straightened out. They help kind of mentor and support new teachers. They part of the special education leadership team. They'll sometimes model for teachers. They'll support paras, provide trainings for teachers and paras. So they do a lot of different things.
Are they, you said they're part of the REA and the teacher's contract. So are these salaries indicative of them being on the salary schedule, just like a
Correct.
normal teacher?
Correct.
Okay.
So if we have one that's in a doctoral program. It's in a doctoral program. We have one getting her master's. So as they climb up the ladder, as they move levels, or they get pay increases.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Brad, I have a quick question about your footnote here that says that this information, or the funds are generated by your PIMS upload on December 1st. Is that December 1st of this upcoming year or December 1st of last year?
That would be this last December?
This last year,
Yeah.
correct, and then that drives the budget. That gives us our allocation.
So we already have the money.
No, they just, it calculates, we will know what the budget is going to be.
Right.
Based on our numbers.
Okay.
We receive the funding, actually, we're like a subrecipient through the IU for that, actually.
Okay, so there's no risk in terms of like that money or that funding going up or down either way?
It really
like,
doesn't
based, like-
fluctuate very
okay,
much
all right.
because our population has been pretty steady, our special education population. This has been a relatively, it continues to go up a little bit every year. It's a pretty solid funding source.
I have a follow-up question on those that are designated as special education teacher. Do they have a caseload, an IEP caseload?
The IEP facilitators?
Yeah, it's designated, as special education teacher. 91,500, 91,955. It's right above
Oh,
access.
I think you're on the access page.
Oh,
Are you still
I'm
on IDEA?
I'm not there yet.
Okay.
We're getting there.
Yeah. Getting there.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Skipping ahead.
The IEP facilitators also help manage IEP meetings. They're part of the process to meetings, which is actually a big piece to what they do. Yeah.
There are 4 lines that are either psychological support or emotional support, and I kind of added them up, and it looks like if we're spending $500,000 more dollars on either psychological / emotional support, is that real?
That's actually almost the exact amount of ESSER's funding that we received for those supports that we want to continue, and it will be picked up by the pupil services budget.
Okay,
So
okay.
that's very good.
Is there like a way to get all, like, the total psychological support / emotional support, in a line somewhere?
A document, we do have
Yeah,
a
okay,
document that
okay.
shows all of the different supports.
Okay.
We can send that
yeah,
to you.
yeah,
Sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then next year we can see how, hopefully we'll keep going up with that funding.
I want to make sure I'm very clear on what you're asking for. So you're asking for all of the budgeted psychological support services, or the amount of ESSER's funding?
These various lines.
Okay.
I have a spreadsheet that I can share with you. This might be what you're looking for, but it has all of our mental health supports, all of our psychologists, all of our intervention. So basically everybody but in-house, like everybody that we use here in the district, not including special education teachers. Is that what you're looking, maybe? Okay. I want you to also keep in mind too, right? Or if you didn't know this, this might be new to you, but so we have students in placements. I talked about that earlier in the presentation. So we still support those students. We just don't have them go to another school and their team does everything. We have what's called an LEA that goes over and is part of their meetings. So if I'm a student at a approved private school and there's an IEP meeting going on, someone from the district will come into the meeting to support that process. So we branch out, right? So especially supervisors, IEP facilitators, they'll go and they'll attend other IEP meetings for students that are outside of our district that we are supporting through funds. They're our kids, if that makes sense.
And our partnership with Penn, the mental health, does that come in here any way to play? I mean, they're just counseling us for free. Does that help us increase our budget, get more personnel, or?
It doesn't, right at this point, it doesn't provide funds for personnel, but we are applying for a $150,000 mental health grant that I hope to hear in the next month or so if we're able to get funds. If we can get that $150,000, that would go a long way. Keep in mind, though, the problem with grants is that once we get them, then as I'm sitting here to you, I'm building that money into the budget for next year. Sometimes we can do that, sometimes, we can't. So, I think this is, in my humble opinion, a very, a nice, I won't say heavy, but a nice addition for mental health support to keep things going in the district. I will say that, yeah.
Sorry, but to ask this question, because I just feel like I need clarification. So these IDEA funds, whatever, that is federal funding, federal funded, you said. So is this entire page completely federal funds?
Yes.
All of the lines. So anything in here, and you said it's a pretty consistent source. So it's not what Dr. John is talking about, grant, like if grant money came in, it could come and go. You feel like this is consistent? These things will be consistently funded federally?
They have. So far they have. I mean, we've had, I will tell you, nothing here, I'm looking at it right now, like nothing is new. A lot of these supports, I mean, the facilitators, you know, they've been in place for years. Yeah.
Okay.
10 years, I think we had our first IP facilitator. Don't quote me on that, but we've had them for a while.
Okay.
Right, and actually, one of the requirements of IDEA funding is that it has to be something that you would already have anyway. So then we can't, you know what I mean? So we would have
Like you
these-
can't just get new title,
Right.
positions and
Yeah,
fund them
so that's
that
why
way.
this is relatively steady funding
Okay.
with relatively steady expenditures.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. I think I'm on to the next slide. So access. So these are the funds I was talking about where we're generating money for the district. So my department is one of the few departments, maybe the only, maybe food services, but it's generating money for the district. As you can see, we have a budget of $1.247 million next year. And so we have our access secretary that's paid out of it. Once again, we can only use this money for special education services and supports, and specifically tied to IEPs. Obviously, there's some caveats to it, like, oh, we're paying for a secretary, but see, this secretary is completely connected to access. When we were able to get more support, like on the clerical end of things or the secretarial end of things, we were able to generate even more money because we had someone who's actually looking into it and kind of controlling it more, if that makes sense. All right, so we have our psychological emotional support services. So several providers that are not picking up for ESSER. So we have funds that are going in. So like I said, we have a school psychologist that instead of coming out of people services, it'll be coming out of the access money, which is a significant amount. We also have mental health clinicians. And I use that term very carefully and very specifically because we have different people in the different district providing mental health services. Okay, it's not a one shoe fits all. So when I talk about mental health clinicians, I'm talking about clinicians that are licensed and certified to provide supports for students that have IEPs that have a mental health goal. So they are solely for students who are servicing students with an IEP goal. Almost like a speech therapist, but instead of working on RTIC, they're working on mental health supports. Same thing. Our speech therapists only work with students that have IEPs. Mental health clinicians. Now we have other mental health specialists that are working with students at the tier 1 and tier 2 level that do not have an IEP. More specifically, they do not have a disability through an evaluation. So those are those. And we have quite a few that are supporting. I believe somewhere around, to get the exact number, I had this number, I just didn't write it down. 3, 4, 5, 6, I believe, 6.5-ish. That are supporting K-12 students. Nursing services, so we have students in the buildings that have their own nurse, right? And if we want to provide inclusive services throughout our schools, we need supports sometimes specifically for students, and they receive nursing services. So we have students in the district that have a one-on-one nurse. We have professional services or placements. Services are now back in pupil services, so students' placements shifted from where it is being paid from. So if you see the professional services with a decrease of $274,883, that money is now, it's not like we're not paying it, we're just paying out of a different area. That makes sense. We have a compliance coordinator as one of our Act 93 positions, so that's 0.15 of that salary is paid out of access funds. We're able to do that based off of the regulations. We have some more software services and supplies, so we have a DocuSign program we use to make things a little less cumbersome for our parents and our teachers, able to sign electronically. We have also a good time to talk. We are shifting one of our autistic support classrooms from one building to another to help do some different things, but we kind of excited about the shift, and so we'll have some money to support that classroom. We're really just shifting a classroom, so we'll going to move everything from one to another, but anytime you have a shift like that, it's always good to support the students with what they need in the new building. And we have a special education teacher. So this is a special education teacher that was brought on as a new teacher this year. So this is we're still paying for that salary, okay? This isn't a new teacher we're adding. I want to be very clear with that. This is a teacher that's already in our building. It's an added teacher and an added program, so we are able to, when we have the situation, we're able to pay through access with a zero impact on tax base. So it's a good thing. So we're able to pay for that teacher's salary out of access, which is not increasing a tax base.
Yeah, that was the one I couldn't figure out why it was sitting out there like that.
Questions on this slide?
Brad, I have a question. Can you help me understand what the psychological and emotional support services are specifically that are covered by the access funds versus what's up in the pupil services budget? Because on slide 4, you're projecting a decrease in funding for psychological support, psychological services there. So I'm just kind of curious why you would have an increase under access but a decrease under pupil services.
All right, so it's actually kind of a couple things. I can start us out here with this. So first off, we have a school psychologist that we're decreasing, and that's not 242 for the school psychologist. It's half of that, if not more, but that's why we're seeing half of that's that decrease. So we're seeing a decrease there for the psychological services and reorganizing that school psychologist to using access funds. If I go back to the access, those professional, give me a second, wrong slide, school health, the access, those, that's psychological, emotional support services through that. So we have, out of the budget, we pay for some of our psychological, even though they're like employees of the district, right? And they don't come out of staffing, some of it comes out of this budget. Comes out of the pupil services budget. So that's why we have that money in there, but then we also have, a multitude of mental health clinicians that are coming out of this budget, and we're seeing an increase. We're able to move services into access and pay for access. So one of the ways we're kind of able to keep a lot of our supports that we have now is moving them out of that piece, although they were grant funded, some other things, and move them into the access. So that's why we're seeing we see a major increase there. I don't know if that was clear.
Right, we're
So,
basically.
yeah, would it be safe to say that there's been some shifting?
Mm-hmm.
We've had the positions, they were just in another part of the budget, and we've moved it over into the access funding. And that's why you'll see last year, our access funding was $800,000 and that we budgeted, and we went up to 1.2 million.
Right.
So we've taken that other $400,000 that was in other parts of our budget and moved it over into access, which is covered.
Correct, we're capitalizing on the increased federal access funding that is being generated. So it's you're seeing a shift in order to take advantage of the funding that we have access to.
And,
No pun
and is
intended.
that impacted by the number of students who have applied for access? Or is that irrelevant to the total amount?
No, it's not irrelevant. I mean, Brad's department works really hard to submit all the appropriate paperwork to the entity that works for the state called PCG. And they do a really good job, and all of the staff do a really good job of making sure that we're documenting services and getting services really through the medical assistance program for the students who qualify. so that they are actually receiving services through medical assistance when we can get them to, and then we are also receiving money from the state for that. So it's kind of like a win-win. That makes sense?
Yeah, and I just want to add too, I know, we've talked previously about the ESSERS funding that we had, and we had a lot of positions that we funded through ESSERS, and some of those teachers on assignment at the elementary school that helped with the additional reading and the additional math support, those positions through ESSERS, we are not going to be recommending as we move forward, but a lot of those mental health positions that we funded through ESSERS money, the ESSERS money is going away, but we really feel a need to continue with some of those mental health services, and that's why Brad's budget is increasing as well, because we're prioritizing the mental health services now that the ESSERS money is going away. But you'll see as we talk later, some of those other teaching positions, now that we're settling in, we're not going to be recommending that we continue those additional, particularly the 10 positions at the elementary school that we had with ESSERS funding.
There aren't any new positions in here, okay? So even though money's getting shifted and we are keeping positions with the ESSERS funds, if you take the financial piece out of it, completely aside, there's nothing, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jackie, I don't think there's anything new in these line items.
Correct, that we aren't already providing this year.
Right.
And where you have staff salaries in your budget specifically, does that include benefits as well, or is that straight up just salary? It does include the benefits? Okay.
So if we're shifting some of our positions to be taken out of the access funds, does that mean that that position can only then service students with IEPs? So my question is, does that then hinder at all if we only have one person able to do that for the entire district versus if we split that up somehow and then you have somebody in each building being partially paid?
That's what we're doing.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
we're doing that. I toyed with another idea, but I decided to do this, where we're keeping supports in, specifically in the elementary building. They are part-time, and they're supporting at the elementary. It's working out really well. I'm getting really good feedback from principals and school counselors about the mental health scholastic coaches. So that's one of the reasons I've decided to keep that model for this year coming up. There are downsides to that model, like anything else, to be honest with you, but we're going to give it another year and see how, not downsides with kids or people, just with, once again, keeping people and being competitive. That makes sense.
I want to ask a couple of questions around that big charter school number, because I know that jumps out at the public, and around charter school reform. So a student leaves O&J to go to a charter school. That student is not identified to have any special needs in O&J.
If they're a regular ed.
Right.
If they're a regular ed student at
Right,
MJ
so they
Brothers.
arrive at the charter school. If they're identified, we have to pay for the tuition difference of whatever that identification is.
Correct. And the tuition is calculated by a form that we have to submit every
Right.
year to PDE, and there's a regular education tuition charter school rate
Right.
and a special education.
I know this, but I think everybody should hear this.
No, that's a good
So
point.
that when so if a child is identified as needing speech and language services, is that a different tuition than if it's a serious emotional? No. So
No.
they could be receiving really what you would think of as mild services in the charter school, but the number jumps from, what are the two numbers?
Correct, 13,000 versus 33, just to
Right.
round it off. Right, if they are identified by the charter school, if they're identified.
And we have no way of appealing that. It's just send
I wish
send
we
the money.
did. This is.
And that's regardless of the service. It could be something as simple as a speech IEP, which is minimal, or we're still getting charged that
This
extra
is why
amount.
there's such a push for charter school reform. That's another
Well,
kind of
Right.
hidden.
I guess the other thing to compare that to would be what is the average cost per student of our entire district for the students that are still in district? Is that somewhere in between the regular and special ed numbers that we're paying to charter schools?
It's hard, we have regular ed tuition rate, we can calculate it, regular ed, special ed, and average, and that is how PDE calculates it as well. So they calculated it slightly, they calculated a little bit different for charter schools versus the way we would calculate it as a school district. There's a slight difference there. So it's not going to be
Right,
exact.
but no, I mean, for the students that are still here in our schools, not going to charter school.
Right.
What do we consider one regular ed student's amount or cost per pupil to be? Do we have that as a number?
It would be approximately the 13,000, because they're taking all of our costs for a certain year and dividing it, by the number of regular ed and special ed. Let's put it this way, there are special education costs that are specifically identified in our general ledger, and there are regular ed. And so they take this, it's called PDE 363, and then they calculate regular ed versus special ed. And it is similar because to those numbers, because they are our tuition rates, but we have to pay them to, the charter schools based on our costs.
Yeah, I guess I'm just trying to figure out if a student doesn't go to a charter school, are they still getting as much money for their education? Or is it bankrupting? Because I've heard of some scenarios for some districts where the district is essentially being bankrupted, so their students that are remaining in the district have less per student because so much money is going out to the charters. And I was just curious, for us, how close are we to that? Are we in danger of that being the scenario?
We are close in the numbers. It's just that we don't have the costs from what we pay, but we don't have the high level of numbers of students that the schools you're referring to are sending out. So if you're sending 50% of your entire student population to a charter school, you're losing relatively 50% of your budget. So that's it's difficult.
And if a big percentage of them are then identified, that's another
Right.
huge cost to a district.
Correct. So yes.
Which it is to us as well. but-
Correct. I hope I answered your question.
Okay, now go to the next slide there. All right, school health services. So we talked about nursing in the beginning of the presentation. There's absolutely no change to this. You'll see numbers straight up. A lot of this stuff is also based off of, we have obviously specific numbers, but we have different areas here. We do support 3 schools from time to time. We have Camp Hill, Kimberton, Waldorf, I should say, and Westmont. So those are the 3 schools that some of our nursing staff support. So these are the total for our nursing. Any other questions from the board? Any online questions, Mr. Cicito?
Those will be at the end, Mr. Benton.
Yeah.
We're just doing board
Board
member
member, board
questions
member.
right now, public questions
Yeah,
at the end.
got it.
Oh, right. Was it Warren?
Yeah, there's a board member online. That's what I was saying.
Was Warren?
Thank you. Okay, next up, our presentation on the curriculum instruction budget by Dr. Soter.
Thank you. Okay, you can go right to the next one. Thank you, Frank. So our budget includes 4 areas. The curriculum development, that's all of the instructional supplies that are in our classrooms. Staff development, this is professional development, training, and the associated costs for substitutes, conferences, anything related to professional development. Jumpstart, that is the budget for our students who receive math or reading support during the year. So this is the support that we provide for them in our summer program. That budget also supports any remediation that we do after school, typically related to our Keystone exams. And that last budget is KinderCamp. That's the orientation program that we have for kindergarten children in August. so we can get started with curriculum. And so every year we have a revision cycle, typically with one core area and one special area that is revised. And so every year you have one area where it has a significant increase because that's the area of revision. So you'll notice in this budget that the language arts is considerably higher than the previous year because that's the area of revision for us. Also, science now is including our new STEAM program, so there is some increases in that science part of our budget. Mathematics, not really an increase, but our overall cost for mathematics, you can see, is still pretty steep. We have a fairly large portion of that is consumable at the elementary level. So that's workbooks and the manipulatives that are part of our elementary mathematics. So you can see those costs. A very large portion of the curriculum development budget is also software. So you had asked earlier in the presentation, Mr. Hermanos, regarding some of our license agreements and some of the contracts that we have. So our software costs, some of them are 1 year, some of them are 2 years, some of them are 6 years. So that really varies. And so those softwares come up whenever they come up, sometimes off the cycle of when the specific subject is being revised. So that in and of itself is a challenge for curriculum development, because we're funding something, for example, in world language or in social studies, even though it isn't that year of revision. So you can see these are the costs associated for the instructional materials. Did want to point out for special areas. So our special area is health and physical education this year. Some of the costs associated for that are in the capital projects, and actually Mrs. Crumrine will be talking about that later this month. So if we have large equipment like treadmills, those kinds of things, updating the fitness classrooms, that's going to come out of capital. Same thing for musical instruments. So we have some costs associated with new orchestra instruments, and that's also part of capital. So these are the estimated costs for next year for, as I said, all of the instructional materials. And for staff development, these are the costs related to the professional services for our teachers, all the training, conferences. This includes what we would be doing for induction, for any of our specialized training for AP or IB, any of that kind of programming is in staff development. We have one non-certificated training that is part of that, as well as a software cost for what we use for tracking Act 48 and the professional hours that our teachers need to maintain their certificates. Books and supplies, that's also part of materials that we use for staff development. And I did want to share, Mr. Bentman, you're not the only department that brings in money, although I have to say we probably are on the larger side of spend than on receive, but we do sell any of our extra books or our used books, and so we do actually have a very small Amazon account that comes in. I did see the amount that you had, and we would have to move the decimal point over quite a bit to reflect what we actually take in. Our last programs, you can see for Jumpstart, that is really that remediation that we offer in the summer as well as during the year for, as I say, for that test preparation just prior to Keystones, that we use some of our Jumpstart funds for that. We did make use of some of the ESSER's funds the past 2 years for Jumpstart. We ran that program for 3 weeks. We will be running it for 2 weeks this year, sort of back to what we had done in the past. KinderCamp is really just the payment for the teachers and the paraprofessionals who support our kindergarten orientation. And again, depending on the school, that is 1 of 2 weeks in August.
Yeah, you said that this budget included all the supplies they need in a classroom. So if I'm a teacher, we always hear the stories of teachers who are using their own money to buy pencils, paper, things like that. Is that a reflection on this budget?
So actually, general supplies like pencil and paper is actually at the building level. And so the principals have an allocation for general classroom supplies. This would be for instructional supplies. So it could be math manipulatives. It could be the classroom libraries. It could be for any of the science equipment, anything that would be specific to any of the programs or curriculum materials that we
Okay,
use.
so not general supplies. Okay, and then what about art stuff?
Art stuff. So they actually have, that's one of our special areas. So they're not in revision right now, but they are supported in this budget. Actually, in professional development, there's a software that we actually use in our art department. When they are up for revision, they might be getting new equipment, but throughout the year, they have a consumable budget that's part of the building budget. So they would be purchasing art supplies, clay, paint, all of those kinds of things would come from an allocation from the principal.
Okay, thanks.
Can you help me understand the difference between Jumpstart, ESY, summer enrichment?
Sure.
I'm struggling with what students fall into each category.
So ESY would come from pupil services. So students who qualify for ESY have an IEP or some kind of specially designed instruction during the course of the school year. A student who is invited to Jumpstart may not have an IEP, but may be receiving math or reading support maybe at a tier 2 level throughout the year, and those students would be invited to Jumpstart. And then at the secondary level, it would be any student who is perhaps accessing remediation for Keystones, which that would be like after school. So there's no IEP or no other support requirement for that. And then the last one, so summer enrichment would be either recreation camps, fishing, volleyball, all those recreation camps. There are some courses, and so that's open to all students. You wouldn't need to have any specific support to attend them.
So Jumpstart is usually, or is generally by teacher referral or by staff referral.
It's
like parents don't opt in. Generally, you are referred to the program.
They are invited. Parents can choose not to
not.
have their child come, but if they're receiving services during the school year, then they're invited.
And it may just be specific to one subject area.
It's
as opposed
math
to
or
ESY.
reading.
Okay.
It's math or reading.
Okay, thank you.
So just to help me understand on this, so this year is the language arts curriculum review cycle.
is, yes.
So there's the big jump in
Right.
materials and curriculum writing. And last year was math.
Last year was,
Foreign language?
last year would have been math and world language, right? We're 2 years out from that. Science is next year, and I want
Right.
to say the prior year before that was social studies. So yes.
But there's still,
Oh, excuse me. I want to say, wasn't that last year would be that fifth year would have been the elective year. So the year prior would have been math.
but there's a big expense in the curriculum review cycle for math again this year.
The large part of that is the consumable program. So I want to say each of the schools, I may have jotted that down. Each of the elementary schools runs around between 18 and 19,000 alone for the consumable part of that program. So it's an expensive program. And I'm glad you're asking about this, because this listing for language arts is for reading. We will have that same expense the following year for writing. We actually split the two just to, but we had a significant increase and all of our costs are going up. So we actually split the two just to level fund it.
Plus, you said science includes STEAM?
It is.
So there's-
About depending on the size of the building, between 4,500 and 5,500 in STEAM-related supplies at the elementary level. And we did receive some grant funds for that, too. Yeah.
Are there any other questions for Dr. Soter? Okay.
I'm sorry.
Oh,
So for, like, language arts that's the year. So the professional development, is professional development for ELA also within that part, or is that within the professional development under staff development?
So all the staff development is K to 12, every subject. It's everything. It's
So
all
but we
professional.
don't have more ELA after we.
So there'll be more hours devoted to it. We usually do that by a number of hours for, that we would be having, for example, when you can have it like a substitute or when you're doing curriculum development. So there's more hours for ELA compared to math and science or social studies in the revision year. So that it is in there. It's part of what when we develop that budget, it's sort of like, okay, for example, we have this many dollars left, so we've got 150 hours. It's going to be, 75 of those hours perhaps devoted to ELA and the remaining divided among the other subjects. So the lion's share of it is going to be for the area that's in revision.
Any other questions? Thank you, Dr. Soter. And our final presentation tonight will be the proposed technology services budget by Mr. Sanfrancesco.
Good evening, everybody. A couple highlights from my technology budget. Cybersecurity, if you're aware of anything that's going on in the world, education is a high target for cybersecurity, and our cybersecurity insurance requires things now. So we actually got a waiver last year, and most districts did. This year, we implemented a lot of things in cybersecurity, and next year is going to be the final phase of that, and it reflects in the budget with some little increases in some different things we're going to be doing. Chromebooks, we're moving down to third grade. We have iPads K through 3, and then Chromebooks 4 through 12. Next year, we're going to third grade. It's a state requirement to do PSSAs and things like that now on Chromebooks, so we have to move it down to third grade, and that was always the goal every year to get it down lower and lower, and K2 is going to be the sweet spot for iPads. 3-12 will still be Chromebooks. As you heard from Dr. Soter's presentation, STEAM. The STEAM, as you know, next year will be in all 5 buildings permanently. Right now, they rotate classes right now, so we're going to outfit some classrooms with some projectors and things like that. This was that planning year and like a team teaching year. So their spaces are going to need some more things next year, as they know. They plan it, and they've already submitted to me. Just very typical classroom things like either a TV, some projectors, things like that. The technology budgets will cover with the principals. And network upgrades. We always improve the network. This year, we improved the wireless network, as you know, throughout the campus, replacing access points and things like that. Also for cybersecurity insurance, they require us to have so many things in place with our wireless upgrades. So we always keep up with networking and switching and the backbone of the district for that. So moving on to the capital budget. Our capital budget, as you know, requires a 5-year projection with all capital, and we really do that with this. And you'll see the numbers fluctuate depending on what like additional computer systems, what laptops we're replacing, things like that. Network upgrades, phones are our leases, the copiers are our lease, things like that. And additional computer systems is basically anything additional, like the Chromebooks and for third grade and 7th and 11th. The replacement computer systems, that's the next thing, just a little breakdown. We just we do it with curriculum. So anytime somebody's curriculum cycle is up, we work with those teachers, especially in the high school and middle school, to see what new technologies they need. And that's how we basically spread out the capital budget. I don't do all projectors at once. We really put it on a rotation. When I got here, all these things were replaced at once, and the budgets would get decimated by just doing projectors. So we've done it with in consultation with the curriculum department, when a cycle's up, we replace those classrooms. So we get to spread those replacement costs over time, and we're not doing every building once. District-wide staff laptops, that's another rotation we put in. We replace by the model number. So whatever your model laptop is, we've spread it out over the last 10 years that I've been here, so we can have teachers on a rotation. So some districts replace every laptop at once. They got to get leases. It's a big number, and it takes the whole budget. We've spread it over so only certain models get replaced each year. Sometimes it's a bigger number because we did some bigger, model numbers that year, just the way it is, but it really doesn't impact the budget that much each year. Chromebook carts this year, they're for the 3rd grade. We do not have a take-home in the elementary. We make sure we're cart-based model. So we need those charging carts for the Chromebooks for 3rd grade. So that's the Chromebook cost you see up there for that part of this budget. Next slide, please. There's the total. So we do 7th and 10th grade. So when they go to middle school, it's a take-home model. So we have to give new Chromebooks to everybody. We replace them 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th grade, they get a new one, 10th, 11th, 12th. So every 3 years, we're cycling in new Chromebooks. The nice thing with the older Chromebooks, if they're needed, they go down to some carts, they do some special ed things, they do other things in district, paraprofessionals, sign in, sign out. We really use any Chromebook that's still available. Now, some Chromebooks get out of life where the state testing is not allowed on certain model Chromebooks. So we do have to get them out of circulation in the student sections because of that requirement by the state. And sometimes cybersecurity issues make us decommission those Chromebooks that won't be allowed. And they're usually 6, 7 years old. We're not talking about 3, 4-year-old Chromebooks. So we really keep them as much as we can. Plus we use them as parts. We try not to change models. So we try to stick with the same model and use the competitive bid through the CCIU or through CoStars. And so everything tries to stay the same. We're not one of these districts that go, oh, you're an ACER 1 year, then you're paying for charging. And the parents are like, I got 10 different chargers in my house. We can't do that to the parents. And then there's the 3rd grade Chromebook cost for next year. Next slide. So there's our general fund budget, our contracted service. So in the technology department, we don't self-employ a lot of our employees. We're contracted out. So that saves on PSERs, that saves on a lot of things that we do. Plus, it allows us flexibility with our staff. So let's say we don't need a staffer, we can move them somewhere else. It really helps us with those contracted services. So they're outsourced. Our telecommunications, internet, things like that, phone bills, all that. The training and travel, staff development, and our department does a lot of traveling throughout the district, meaning mileage. We get our own cars. We're constantly going to the district. So that's covered under that budget too. General supplies, general stuff we need for our department. Administrative software went up a little. That's where the cybersecurity comes in. So we're using a new software called CrowdStrike. So think your antivirus at home, your Norton or your McAfee. That's kind of not allowed anymore in schools. You have to get a cybersecurity antivirus now that basically detects ransomware and things like that. It absolutely monitors every device we have, and it's a cybersecurity requirement now to get our insurance. So we had to upgrade to CrowdStrike. We partnered with a couple districts, Unionville, Springford. We kind of got a consortium bid with that. So it was really good to partner with other districts to really get leveraging prices. And plus, if things go, we can collaborate now with those 2 school districts on what we're doing with our cybersecurity. Dues and fees, basically the things we need for any organizations we go into and things like that. Technology budget this year is really straightforward. We're really not doing, a major initiative or change except for the 3rd grade. That's the biggest thing. Just kind of maintaining everything we have, Google Classroom, Canvas, things like that. A couple of software licenses went up. That's just inflation and things like that. And we went through everything. Any questions?
What's the increase in the site techs that you have there? Is that a new person?
I can help with that one. We have the site techs through EBS, and in order to retain the quality of site tech services that we have, their hourly rates did go up.
Okay.
Just everybody's hourly rates are going up, but their hourly rates went up.
Okay.
But they're still contracted service.
Okay. Thanks.
As we become more, electronically dependent, are we seeing reduction in like paper stuff, like?
Paper budget going down.
Your $175,000 for the next 5-year projection, it's not.
So the lease we're in a lease. And I have to say, our overages costs have gone down. They really have. The principals have done a great job on really getting teachers to do more on Canvas and Google Classroom. There just still is a mindset that we have to print everything. Mr. Bettman's done a great job of streamlining a lot of the IEPs. We used to print pages and pages and throw them out after the meetings. Now we're in rooms with technology. Now we're in rooms with everybody has it. Now we have Link It with things in there. We're moving in the right direction. It's a hard shift to go paperless. Everyone's like, you got it. But we reduced the number of printers in the last lease, and we're going to do it again in the next lease, which is up. Really even the admin team. I got to give credit to our admin team. We had copiers and printers in a lot of places. And when I said we're going, Jackie's one of them, and our admin building went down from 3 copiers to 1 on each, 4 copiers to 1 on each floor, so 2 in that building. People panicked. What am I going to do? We have Secure Print, and it's right there. And it was a different mindset. My building at Warwick, we had 1 printer, we had a copier. Everybody now goes in the hallway and prints, and nobody has them in their office anymore. So it's actually, do I feel like going to print that, or should I send this way? It is changing. It's a slow process, but we have seen a decrease in the overages and a decrease in that. And hopefully, we're always going to have the copiers, but we got rid of all desktop printers. We're all printing to the copiers now, which is huge on maintenance, ink, things like that. And people printing. Do I feel like getting that? If it's convenient enough, hey, but our staff, our teachers have done a great job of really trying to do as much as they can with the digital resources that we have.
And I wanted to add to that too, because Beth, in the business office, the price of paper has gone up significantly. I mean, significantly. So the more that we can do to conserve, and Beth does an amazing job with her staff in really getting the best deal possible. Right now, the IU is not even doing a paper bid, but she was able to secure paper for next year at lesser quantities. So everybody's working really hard to keep the cost down.
This might be a silly question, but that doesn't mean that we're putting students on devices more versus doing the. Okay.
Absolutely not.
I just want to make sure.
Nope. And our teachers, our staff, it's great PD, great development. There's a balance between tech and non-tech, and they know when to turn it off. It's really that resource. We've taught our staff that just don't do technology for technology's sake. I mean, grab the book. They hear it from the tech director, and they look at me, And we all know what's coming with AI, ChatGPT, things like that. We're doing staff development, really enhancing the staff to use that, but also teacher students, there's other ways to get the information. And we're being proactive instead of reactive with a lot of that stuff. And you're right, there's a balance between tech and no tech. Yep. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Here's a general question. So every year we get these budgets and we approve them. How do we find out how we did?
Well, the auditors come in
Yeah.
and they audit the financial statements. So the financial statements are on the website, and we have a clean bill of health. We also give you projected numbers too. So at this point in the game, we included projected numbers as well, so that you can see, okay, how are we doing this year? Where do we think we're going to land? It's an estimate. But yes, we're audited.
But when I do a budget,
Look out,
it's always
right?
over.
Any more question from the committee on our presentations today, or general budget concerns? Okay, I'd like to open it up to some public questions if we have any. Yes, please state your name and township of residence.
Okay, I had a couple questions. Heather McCurry, East Coventry. So the Pupil Services budget referred to 264 students in ATP, and I'm kind of confused why that is on here because that is not an accurate reflection of what's going on in this district. And I go back to my broken record, and I know people are watching and listening and putting their names into runs, so I really hope that we can get this corrected here because when you get to the high school, the ATP program just completely drops off. So I don't even know why those numbers are on there with the reference to multivariable calculus or whatever the math is, because any student can take that. You don't have to be an ATP child to take that. So Mr. Bentman probably doesn't know that either, because that's something that was set up before he started doing his job. So I circle back to last month when we had a data meeting, and during the time that you had the data meeting, there was some items put up about how, I'm pretty sure, I only listened to it, the recording didn't go up until like last week. So I listened to it very quickly to try to understand how, to me, it looks like almost half the students in this district are not at benchmark or doing well in math. And so when you guys don't have a regular standalone curriculum meeting, and the only thing you have is that data presentation, and then you go to this budget, I don't understand how anything is getting done to review where you need to spend the money and improvements that are being made. Does that make sense? Because here we are at this budget meeting and things are just being put in here that since you haven't had a standalone pupil services meeting, you haven't had a standalone curriculum meeting, nobody can comment. The people in this district that have special ed kids can't come and comment. Somebody like me to make my comment regarding APs and IBs and AP capstone. You know, that's like a broken record to me, but what also is happening is the email I sent to you guys, or to Board Director April and Nick, and also to Dr. Soder, that like didn't happen, right? Like, so there was no correction sent out to taking AP World History in 9th grade. I circled back to the parent that spoke to me, and that did not happen. So I don't understand where the disconnect is happening with this. The thing that I would always bring up is, you know, we made strides here curriculum-wise, but we never pay attention to it. We got, you know, we worked on the math, we worked on the gym and the health a little bit. And so when I asked the question about what happened to the AP scores and the IB scores, and then I was told that they were reported in the annual report. The link, I think, is still broken on that. So while I made a copy of it, I'm confused about how much money is being allocated to the IB program, because to me, it looked like there were 22 students taking it. And if you remember, Director Deal, and I went back and looked at that meeting, October of 21 said, we need to take a look at this program and see if it's viable. If it's not viable, we should think about it. And so when I would bring up that subject before and then bring it up again, it's not that I have anything against the IB program. It's just that you guys are limiting access to so many students in this district from excelling. And when I bring up the equivalent of the AP capstone, you know, you don't have to do that, but I'm just telling you guys, you are limiting access to children to exceed here in this school district. And you're making these decisions right now. And when it comes back up again, the answer is going to be, oh yeah, we can't do it, right? So $10,000 down for the math class that's not being taken. That's $10,000 you could put to 1/2 of running the AP capstone program, and also the training that's hidden in that budget line for the number of teachers that go to the IB programming. You could divert that to do the AP capstone program. The deadline for that is December, and the reason I keep focusing on that is because this is a smaller school. Kids are doing so many unique things, and that's a program where you only have to take one AP class to then take an individual seminar to be able to excel in whatever field you want to. So I bring that up. I think that covers a lot of it, but I wish you guys would have a regular pupil services meeting and a regular curriculum meeting to devote time and allow people to dial in and ask questions or come forward on those subjects. I know there's a town hall this week, but I don't think that takes the place of having a board meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Are there any other question or comments?
We have 3 online.
Thank you.
Beth, if you can state your full name and township of residence.
Okay, I hope you can hear me. This is Beth
Yes.
Chevelle Fuller, East Nantmeal Township. First of all, I wanted to say thank you to all 3 presenters. I thought it was very well done, answered many of my questions. It was layman's terms, so thank you to all 3 of you. And to the board members who asked questions, you asked almost every question I wrote down, so thank you. That was great. A couple questions, however. One, to Mr. San Francisco, who I think walks on water because you helped me so much when I was there. Okay, so I really do. You outsourced the building techs. I know that. My question is it more economical to do that? I know you're not paying insurance benefits, PCERS, et cetera, but would it be, and you would know better than me, not better to hire in-house and keep them there year after year after year? Because we used to go through so many. And there's a relationship that's created, and then the next year or 2 years later, they would be gone. And we have to get somebody else in and get them trained. So just a thought, and you know the answer. I don't. Just a thought. Okay. Another question, Mr. San Francisco. The Chromebooks, do the kids pay anything for those Chromebooks? Do they pay $25 a year or whatever? And where does that money go? Does it go back into the Chromebook fund is my question.
Go ahead, Paul. You can
Do you want me to answer that?
Yeah.
So they do a yearly fee, and we are self-funded insurance, which means we do all the in-house fixing and doing of that Chromebook. So any device, we internally do that. So we save money. Many districts outsource that, and there's a huge cost to that. And also there's a responsibility that for that fee, it covers a lot of the things that goes wrong. So we need batteries, we need keyboards, you need screens, all that's covered. And my department does that all internally, which in essence saves us money in the long run.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Question about the math cost every year. If our math scores are not going up on PSSAs, Keystones, et cetera, and I think the whole world right now is struggling, but do we look at what other districts are doing, or do we automatically keep the same math program, like everyday math year after year, and not look into, well, it's a new year, is there a new program that might be better? So that's just my question about math. And I don't know. Yeah.
We do look at other programming during the revision year. So yes, that is something that we do, just like we did for ELA.
Thank you. And one more question, if I could. Dr. Bettman, in his first presentation, and then Nick Rotoli asked a question that got me thinking about the charter schools and IEPs. If a student in a charter school is determined to need an IEP, do we test the student, or does the charter school test the student and make that determination? And that's all I have.
So when a student is being evaluated through charter school, they test. But if we have, if a student is in a Catholic school, we'll do the assessment. So it depends on what school they're at, but with charter, we don't evaluate students.
Okay, so we don't have any.
Religious school, any type of school in that aspect, we provide the services because we're the home school.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. I thought this was fascinating.
Thank you.
That's all.
Next question.
The next hand is Carrie Culp. If you can please state your full name and township of residence.
Hey guys, Matt Lasmanis, East Coventry Township. Thanks again for the presentations tonight. Found it really informative. The one, and it was raised already, I'm quite confused by, is on the gifted services line item. It was stated that we're going from a budget of, I believe, $18,000 to $10,000. And the reason that was cited was because we're paying for less students to attend the Johns Hopkins CTY calculus class. As far as I know, that's not a gifted services program. So I guess a couple questions stem from that. Why is the gifted services budget so sensitive to a program that's not specifically gifted services? Also, on the flip side of it, are we saying that the district is open to funding academically talented students to attend Johns Hopkins CTY, which I would be all for. Both of my kids were in the gifted program in OJR. Both were part of Owen J. Roberts CTY. I would be all for us exploring opening up our gifted services program to include acceleration and participation in CTY by our gifted students, but I wasn't aware we were considering that. So if we're open to doing that, and we're open to spending our gifted services funding with CTY, I would be more than happy to work with the board and work with the school district on developing that partnership. I know the folks over there actually really well. So two-part question, why are gifted services presumably being spent on programs that are not gifted specific, which is what it seems like was suggested? And secondly, are we open to using our gifted services funding within the district to open up more opportunities for our ATP kids to attend Johns Hopkins CTY? Thanks.
Mr. Bettman, would you like to address that?
So students over the years took multivariable calculus through Johns Hopkins. It's specific to the math piece because you can only go certain distance with math in the district, okay?
Right.
We have a very small amount of students that want to take that class that are actually eligible because you got to go through Calc AB, Calc BC, and then you go multivariable, which is very rare. I don't want to get into specifics, but it's an extremely difficult class, and it's an extremely difficult class. I'll just leave it at that. So we can provide multivariable calculus at the building level. It's just we do not have enough students to take it to fill a class section at the math department. So I don't want to get into the gifted versus non-gifted students taking multivariable because it is my understanding that we had students in each category, although the history, which I'm well aware of, gifted students took multivariable calc that were students that were gifted. But as inclusivity goes, we want to provide those services to as many students as we can that are possible. But we haven't seen, it's a difficult class, I'll just leave it at that. I'm not prepared or want to answer your other question at this moment, but that's where I'm at with the multivariable class.
We have a few other questions, Ms. McCreary, so we'll get back to you.
Lisa Yost, please state your full name and township of residence.
Hi, this is Lisa Yost from South Coventry Township. I'd just like to thank you all for your presentations this evening. They were very informative. My questions are also for Mr. Bettman. And the first one is around, I guess, the presentation in general. So there were some comments made in the presentation around small increases and small decreases. And the first one I'll point to is emotional support, where the increase from the current budget went from 29.2 to 19.8 or 96.6, I believe, where this was referred to as a small increase. I would just encourage you in the future to be a little bit more mindful when you're giving your presentations around the magnitude of increases and decreases for the budget. To me, this is not a small increase. This is an increase of 3 times magnitude. And while I agree that an increase in emotional support is greatly called for, given services that many of our children need, I would just call for a change in the way that this is presented, because a 3 times increase in magnitude of spending is not a small increase, that's a rather large increase. The second question I have is related to the same question that Mr. Lasmanis just asked, which was the ATP budget, which was decreasing from 18,000 to 10,000. I have 2 children with GIEPs in elementary school who are in the ATP program. And I would love to know what programs are included under that line item. If one particular math class that was not specifically an ATP item was roughly 40% of that line item, it is a bit confusing to me. So I'd love to know what exactly that line item entails and what warrants the roughly 40% decrease in that line item looking to next year, given that there are over 200 students that are noted on that line item, and over 200 students would not have been taking that specific math course. Thank you.
Well, let's address this one first.
I can respond to the question regarding where are all the other costs. So the pupil services budget doesn't include salaries and benefits unless they're grant funded. So this is under pupil services. So these are for a tuition cost for that individual school for students who we can't provide programming here, or we don't have enough for a class section. All of the salaries and other expenditures are actually in the personnel budget for the gifted teachers, the supports, building level budgets also include supplies. There are other costs involved for those students. I just want to make sure we're clear about that.
Just to kind of make this clear, so the total budget for ATP programs is much larger than what's reflected in this one line item under pupil services,
That's correct.
because it's in several different departments or pieces of the budget.
Correct.
But the tuition costs that you're just referenced, so the reason why this is a decrease here is because we have a decrease in students then, I would assume, right?
Correct. It's a
The
decrease in the
264,
number
so
of
we don't have the
students
full
being
picture because
projected.
we don't see the decrease in students.
Correct.
Right.
Right.
And not all 264 students would have been in that one piece.
No, not, absolutely not. Right.
And there is also gifted or ATP cost associated within pupil services for the IEP, within the IEP process parts of the budget. That is not broken out in this budget to say which ones are being generated by students with a GIEP versus those with an IEP.
Correct.
So that there is cost, or there is money within this pupil services budget that also is considered in support of our GIEP students.
Correct. It's not just this line item. That's the main point.
Okay. Ms. McCrary, do you have a question?
So so also Matt is trying to raise his hand again, and he says he's not getting in. But so the math program goes back to things that we've talked about before, and a lot of you guys are new, but a lot of us that listen and are listening to this are not. So the math program starts in the very beginning when math was advanced, and a few children, 5 from each elementary school, got on a bus. The bus went around to all the schools and brought the kids up here to the middle school. There was a limited number of kids that were allowed fast math, advanced math. The other children that took it, like my two, got Algebra 1 and 2, Algebra 1A and B in 7th grade, and then they got Geometry in 8th. They hit high school, they got Algebra 2, then they got Pre-Calc, then they got AP Calc or regular Calc, and then they had no place to go. So they had to take stat, or some of those kids went to take multivariable, and that's where multivariable comes from. And I know for a fact there's children that were in my kids' grades, or my kids' classes in 15 and 17 that were not identified as gifted that took that program. So that program was not just for the gifted. So then we went back and we took off the 4th year of math because the state did not require it. But that did not mean we had to dumb down the entire math program in the district. And I don't know what happened with the program of studies, but I think something was tweaked with Algebra 1A and B or something at the middle school. I missed that. Other people may know that, but I'm concerned when I hear this because, like, I have a friend, right? She's got a 4th grader and a 2nd grader. She's in Commonwealth Charter, and I talked to her. She's in the district, and her kids are so far ahead and doing so much better in math than if they were in this district school. So you want to know why kids are leaving and not coming back? That's why, right? It starts at the math programs, and it ends up at the high school. Right? Because again, in the high school, the ATP program stops when you hit 9th grade. If you can take gifted seminar, but guess what? You don't even get AP credit for gifted seminar. Oh, here's Heather again, AP capstone. You can get AP credit for the seminar and research, right? But you can't
Mr.
get,
Perry,
go ahead.
If you could keep your questions related to the budget, this sounds like it's more of a curriculum
Well,
type
but it
question.
is, but it
And
go-
when we have a curriculum meeting, either in a working session or a standalone session, you'd be welcome to ask
But
these
you
questions
don't.
then.
You don't, and you guys promised that you were going to have participatory budget meetings. And I admire the fact that you allowed us to ask questions, but participating in budget meetings is not
So-
what you've
so
allowed
can-
us here. I
can
just
you-
want to
can you-
remind you of that.
Can you just?
I said my piece, I'm fine.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions online? Any other questions from the BFG committee or the board at large? Okay, thank you, everybody. This meeting's adjourned.